I want to talk today a little bit about why art, and in the official title it also says the creative class. I shorten it now, why art won't or will never save cities. And I just found out when I was doing this, actually, you're probably the wrong audience here. I'm very sorry. I should have, should talk to mayors and an art, art strategists at cities, and probably not at the people who actually represent the art business. But nevertheless, no, seriously, this is a little bit of a provocation, which comes at the end of very interesting days here at the art fair. I'm sure the whole sector and galleries, artists involved had a very good time, either intellectual-wise or business-wise. And I like to give you a little bit of food for thought, and actually also food for thought for discussion. We have only half an hour. I try to be fast so we can have a little bit of discussion about the topic, which I think is quite interesting. And it's a topic which gained momentum in recent years because the rise of cities. Cities now account for over 50% of world population. This was a big date last year. The UN estimated that now over half of the world's population live in cities. So once more, cities seem to re-emerge as the catalyst and the motor for development. The numbers, as they're predicted, will grow even more extreme. 75% will soon be living in cities or urban areas around the world. So, cities are again a very important engine. Now, one interesting aspect about cities, and I'm sure you heard about it, or you even work in this area, even if you're the wrong audience, but probably indirectly you work on this, is the competition among cities. Cities now, more than ever, especially in the global field, compete for investments, for talented people, for visitors. This is a graph by a English professor who basically looks at cities and categorizes them. Besides their image, he doesn't look at the real size of the city or image or if it's a great place to live. It's just the economic power and the importance of cities, and catalogs into alpha, beta, and gamma cities. And this shows how important for cities now this global competition is. And in this global competition, cities sometimes feel like almost like a product, a commodity, where people can pick to relocate their business or relocate themselves. And there was a very important book written a couple of years ago by Richard Florida. I'm sure some of you heard about it or even read the book, The Rise of the Creative Class, basically arguing that globalization and the switch from industry-based to service-based economies means that the talented, high-educated people are totally mobile and basically can choose where they want to live and create their companies. And he was urging cities not to go for big, factories, but actually go for the right people to flock into the cities, and then the people will automatically do business. So a huge industry emerged. We are part of it. We are kind of a specialized creative think tank, work mostly for big companies, big cities, countries, regions, to reposition them, long-term strategies, the hard stuff behind the scenes. We don't do logos, we don't do campaigns, we don't do marketing things. We usually do the thing before, actually, to reinvent the story, the narrative, in this case, city has. And I was, with a little bit of growing concern last couple of years, witnessing something probably, or something which could be a little bit disturbing, and I'd like to discuss this with you, is actually the use of art and arts and culture industry, creative industry, almost as a simple marketing tool, as a superficial way trying to gain momentum for a city. And this is why my title is so provocative. Probably talk to this audience here to see if there is some truth in my observation that art and creative industry is being used by cities sometimes basically to promote themselves or to just hopefully gain momentum, and it's not really helping the cities. One thing is that every city is now trying to have a cultural strategy and position themselves. We didn't extensive research on this, based on the work we do. And, it's amazing how many cities basically name themselves cultural capitals or basically tell the world that they're rich in culture or in arts. For the purist among us, it's actually a little bit of an oxymoron. No, it's not an oxymoron. It's actually a logic thing. It's, every city is cultural or historically rich, because otherwise it wouldn't be a city. So it's a little bit of a strange thing. If a city, boosts, we have a lot of creativity and culture. That's more or less, true for every bigger settlement. So these strategies often are very superficial, and probably something which is interesting is to see ways how to not being used just for marketing reasons or for superficial strategies, and also the danger of sameness. Now, what do I mean with this? Sometimes it is a little bit of a how do you call it? The aspiration, or the promise is a little bit before the fulfillment, and highly paid consultants go to these cities and explain and promise that these cities can use arts and creative industry and creative culture to change, to become very attractive, to really become better. Unfortunately, the world is a little bit difficult or different, and some of the cities actually lose sight of just real everyday work and everyday challenges they need to face, and not just to do interesting art strategies. I think you understand what I'm getting at. I'm not criticizing the logos, I'm not criticizing the marketing campaigns here. I'm looking at ways, or I'm looking why there's a danger of the arts and creative industry becoming basically a victim of a marketing booster industry without any real impact. Now, why is this? This is also a very interesting graph. These are the 7, I don't know, not the most important architects, but several important names of architects, Koolhaas, de Meuron, all these guys, who built cultural venues. This has become in recent years a very, very lucrative niche and a very, very important tool in cities to position themselves. Some critique says it's almost archiporn, where you choose a name architect, basically hoping that your cultural institution or your city will benefit from this. Several people know the idea of the Bilbao effect, that once Guggenheim moved to Bilbao, Bilbao started to prosper. Other people look at these important architecture as being the catalyst for city development. What is interesting is it somehow happens still in the Northern Hemisphere only. We'll see what's happening in the let's say more dynamic part of the world, who is now emerging probably more in the south. So this playing field, almost this danger of sameness, of trying to use very simple instruments of arts or creativity to position a city or to make a city more attractive, are at least open for debate. And the question is, what comes next? Which city is gonna hire which architect to do the next big cultural building? Now, there are 3 challenges to this general idea of why art and the creative industry and cultural industry, there are different names for it actually, when you go into literature, you have all different names. Why their impact probably is a little bit different than what most people think, or what a lot of mayors or city managers hope. I'd like to give you 3 areas where there at least is a huge debate right now. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, it's food for thought, it's provocation. There are 3 areas where we have to really look a little bit closer at numbers, closer at what really happens. First of all, it's the so-called Bilbao effect, the idea basically that an opening of a major cultural institution, can immediately turn a city around. There are people who believe that Bilbao was a total dull, unimportant, idiotic city, and then Guggenheim came, opened the museum, and all of a sudden, it was like, it's basically Xanadu and El Dorado in one. Now there's growing literature in urban strategies or so who are questioning this. And just on a very simple level, this graphic, these are the passenger numbers of the Bilbao airport. Now, you are very, very, very smart and very geographically able. So Bilbao is quite remote. So passenger number at the airport is more or less follow or more or less showing the how the connectivity of the city is. The airport is a very important part of how to get to Bilbao. And you see this last 20 years. Last 20 years, and you see there's an event where all these passenger numbers went up, skyrocketed. And the debate now is going on, is this the Bilbao effect? Is this the Guggenheim effect when Guggenheim opened? Now, actually, if you look closer to it, this is when the no-frill airline started to fly to Bilbao. The no-frill airline is a recent new phenomenon in Europe. Southwest Airlines and other airlines in the US are a little older, and Air Berlin, EasyJet, Ryanairs, they started later. And Bilbao at one point was on their map, and they provided much more seats to Bilbao. Actually, the opening of the Guggenheim was here. Now, we could still discuss and say, well, people needed 2, 3, or 4 years to realize that there's the Guggenheim, and then they come in hordes. Other people, and also interesting papers, argue, the impact of the opening museum, the opening of the museum had no impact. It was basically the bigger connectivity who draw people, because lower prices, to Bilbao. Most of the people probably not even visitors. People were just, doing more business or, ethnic traffic and all stuff. So the question here in this very simple thing here is, how much of real effect is there by a big cultural institution for a city? Other people in other papers say, well, but there are more galleries now in Bilbao, and the museum kind of had a spillover. Other people say, no, that's just, generally Spain's, progress and let's say more openness towards arts and culture, who generated the galleries or the art scene, which would have come anyway, also without the Guggenheim. Again, I'm just asking questions. We probably will never know. The second challenge is that, and this is probably bad news, or I'm probably an asshole telling you this. Generally, the arts or creative industry has 3 weaknesses. The first one, I know it's tough, innovation averse. It's underfunded and fragmented. What do I mean with innovation averse? There are extensive studies, of course also observations, and I'm sure some of you will probably agree with me, that especially the creative industry is actually not very innovative. It's very simple, not because the people are bad or they're stupid, it's because most of them, and at least with the underfunded, once they find a formula how they can sell a product, a special type of website or a special, event strategy, they tend then to sell the same thing over and over because they found a product which gives them money. And because everybody needs to make money, then they basically stick forever. So compared to other sectors, biotech, even financial industry, and all the so-called bad-mouthed hedge funds or so, they're probably more innovative than certain areas in the creative industry, because people tend to stick with their formula. And just redesigning a website or doing a new website, in a new fashion is probably not creativity. I know there's a long discussion, and this is a different topic, and we can talk about it the whole day tomorrow. What is creativity? What is innovation? So if you look closely to the industry, it's actually an innovation averse. Now, it's underfunded, I think this is clear. The creative industry in all countries, even in big creative capitals like Los Angeles, Milan, Paris, where you have total, entire value chains in the creative industry, they usually, compared to their peers in other sectors, always have a money problem. And the whole scene is very fragmented, which makes it interesting. Yes, it's great to have small little companies, but it's also very difficult, for example, themselves to have a lobby, to organize. And so just on a plain paper, this sector is actually not very attractive for a city development. Yes, it attracts interesting people, that's true. But other sectors or other areas also attract interesting people. So this argument is not 100% okay. I talked about creativity, innovation and creativity. And also, one of the biggest problem, and I know it's sorry to tell you this on a Friday at 6 p.m. after, I'm sure a successful fair, or, in the midst of a successful fair, the relative size of the sector is actually very small. So the question is, how much of a real impact can it have? These are numbers, okay, these are 2003 numbers, but, ladies and gentlemen, it didn't change overnight, massively. The entire creative sector, creative industry, accounted for 2.5% of the workforce in the United States. And I'll tell you, it is not much more in other countries. It differs a little bit. There are some countries who are a little bit stronger in the creative industry versus the rest. But more or less, it's a very small industry. Now, we all know that relative size is not, it's not everything. You have something which is small size but has an important impact. But, at one point, numbers are important. So the question is, if you position a city or if you go massively for a creative and art strategy, besides the image gain, if you have any, remember the sameness in the architectural archi-porn buildings, does it really make an impact on the future of your city? Now, what I'm suggesting is that we start to question, at least question here, and and I'm part of the creative sector, and part of, at the end of the day, also the culture and arts, although our company probably is a little bit in between. That we tend, especially in events like this, tend to look at basically the idea or the strategy being, if you boost art, then business comes to a city. And if you look at numbers, if you look at case studies, it's still the other way around. And if you look, by the way, historically, this is very interesting. If you look historically, and now we've got all the artists complaining that New York or London or Tokyo or Milan, is high rents, nowhere to go. They're still the most important art cities because probably they're important business towns as well. So business, commerce, trade, exchange, and especially the accumulation of wealth enables art to play a bigger role. I had a huge discussion a couple of years ago. I was part of a private initiative or of a private foundation to look at Berlin's strategy for the future. And I was quite critical back then because I said, if Berlin continues to be important as an art and creative city, it would be the first time in the more or less history of cities, or the history of humankind, that a city which is economically totally unimportant plays a creative and artistic role over certain years. So the whole thing between business and art is a very, very interesting field to look at. And I urge you to still, probably think less of this and think less of this and think more of this. Now, just to avoid the danger of me being negative or kind of a spoiler or so, I like to offer a way out a little bit of this discussion or probably a third area which I think we should focus on, which in my opinion is the most important benefit arts and creative industries and culture can bring to cities, which really make a change. And we need this. Many cities in the Western world, and I'm not going to talk about the cities in the emerging world, are facing massive problems. We have massive social problems, we have inequalities, we have youth problems, we still have huge crime problems, and this affects almost every city. I think that art should very much be linked to education. I think an inner strategy, much more, small time work, everyday work, probably the not very fancy work in the arts and creative community, and link this to education is probably one of the best bets where you really can build sustainable and successful cities, regardless of any kind of culture capital strategies. I'm not against culture capital strategies. I worked on them. I'm one of the bad guys. But I think that art should definitely be an agent for education. In my opinion, education is not only worldwide, but especially in the Western Hemisphere and in Europe, one of the key areas where we lost track, where we lost competitiveness, and we need to gain this back because this is basically the key to many solutions. And we probably should look more into how we can link art and education, less than just do fancy positioning in being creative in an art city for an industry which is very small in size and very fragmented. So one of my hopes is that, and again, I'm not against archi-porn. I also adore these museums and the cultural institutions. But we'll see then, the booming markets in the southern hemisphere, who are the next big countries. We here in the northern hemisphere are probably more on the, let's say, on the defensive now, and they probably are, having an opportunity to use arts and the money who goes with arts and the creative industry to do different things than just fancy things. So I think it needs the right balance. Of course it needs vanity. We're here in a big show who definitely also lives from the vanity factor, and it's absolutely okay. Vanity is something good. Excitement is something good. Art deals is something good. The art industry is something good. But we also need to see how art can actually provide more opportunity. Opportunity through education, an opportunity for these cities through real change and real programs and really grassroots areas. And unfortunately, in some of the cases I worked on, I'm not going to name the cities or regions, sometimes big money was spent on advertising on fancy projects where the ruling political class could basically pat themselves on the shoulder and say, wow, great how we position them. And this money who actually then was missing in real arts and creative programs where you can really make a change, where art and creativity, creative industry, culture industry can really position and build cities. So if we look more into this area, I think art can save cities. And my provocative title from the beginning becomes obsolete. Thanks very much. For discussion. I'm sorry, I want to do 20 minutes, so any comments? I think I just...
Question, not a comment.
Yeah, now it's working.
Yeah? Okay. Can you give concrete examples of art and education, investment in art education? What do you mean?
Sorry, one more time.
Can you give concrete examples of what you mean by investing more in art and education?
Well, for example, I think that art in general, and again, I don't know, I won't name cities or areas and so, and I'm also not, an all everybody who knows every city. But generally, I can still see that, for example, art is still underrepresented in certain school programs. Yes, it had a renaissance, but not everywhere. It's still seen by many people as something, an add-on, kind of an esoteric add-on. So I think arts program in schools also, we are facing, and I'm talking now especially about the West, we are facing a huge challenge in basically retraining. We generally have now, let's say big areas in our society who have, who didn't enjoy a very good education now have to be retrained because otherwise we're not competitive at all. And for example, in this area, arts and culture still plays a minor role. And I think there it could be much more interesting for them to be involved. So these are for me real programs. And by the way, I'm an extreme, business and corporate advocate. Our clients are usually the Fortune 500. So I don't mean like big government spending, but I mean a realistic spending of also private fund money, of foundation money, of grants, and so in this area. I know there's a lot going on already, but I'd like to have this discussion about to build arts and creative cities from within, actually, and not from above.
Can you give an example of someone who's doing it right?
It's difficult to say because it's there is not one. Then people would say, okay, I think this city is the best doing this. I think every city or many cities are trying to do is one or better or worse. No, I wouldn't name one city. Oh,
Sir. Thank you. Barcelona.
No comment. I'm not 100% sure. Unfortunately, I know the price tag so far on the strategy to become the Mediterranean creative capital. It's quite an investment, and we'll see if the Germans are still willing to pay for it. It's a Euro internal joke, sorry. From a Swiss not involved.
I think your point of view is very well taken. I think most of the reason that cities do that is that they actually are competing for those millions, even though they're a small percentage of people to come to their city because they understand that. So when you compare the population of creative class, I would think it would be worth looking into what constitutes a creative class company versus like a big industrial company that may populate thousands of employees. So you're not just going for a different percentage, you're going for a different type.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I hope I did the warning. I mean, again, not everything is numbers, and you're totally right. I mean, a small company or organization of 20 people probably can have now a more impact than a 1,000 company who is doing boring products. But at the same time, we shouldn't overestimate the possible contribution of the arts and creative industry.
But I agree with you, because I think that the big projects really, in a way, suck away the potential for incubation. Because especially in this country, most arts projects are supported by the public. So these are mostly public, monuments, like the ones we built here in our city. And what they do is they take away from the potential of hundreds of incubator artistic companies creating their own form of art, which would be much better in the long run for the city.
Totally agree. And again, we have we're facing the same challenges everywhere else. Election terms, short election terms. Mayors and political elite want quick results. And some people come and say, well, basically we'll turn your city around in the next quarter. We were once asked by, I'm not going to name the city, and I'm trying to kind of get the details away, so you're not going to find out which one. We were once hired by a city for a long-term strategy to reposition it, and it started with the idea, oh, Mr. Sevcik, you have to turn our city into the next Berlin. So we said, well, we're not quite sure, and we came back with a proposal to position the city as the celebration of average.
Hello? Hi, over here. Well, as someone in higher education, of course, I'm a huge champion of this. I think the challenge we're facing in higher ed, though, is this issue of assessment. And I think it's more than just our education. It's about creative thinking and doing it across the board and not just in what you were saying. But meanwhile, the consumer culture of higher ed, they want numbers, they want the rankings, and you can't measure creativity. And so you have these two forces. So how do you convince the powers that be that it's about creative thinking and how that creates innovation? I mean, it's Florida's model, but you have this market-driven consumer culture. They want the stuff, but they don't understand how it all works.
Well, market-driven is not bad, I have to say, because on the other side, the creative industry and the arts industry faces some of the same challenges. And I think you all agree here, and even if we are in a very high-leveled fair, there's a lot of mediocre or bad stuff also in the creative industry and in the arts. I mean, I don't think that this is a sector who exceptionally is only producing very good results. So. Yes, creative thinking is important, but the problem with the sector is facing, okay, number is one thing, long-term impact is another thing. When you do campaigns or build a new bridge, which by the way is important, again, infrastructure and all stuff is important, but this short-term versus long-term thinking is one thing. You know what? I'm convinced two things. First of all, I think a new generation of leadership, which is younger, probably more female, probably more world experienced, will have a different view on this. And I'm speaking now again about, let's say the Western industrialist country are still run by white old men. And this change may be, bringing new thoughts. Also, I mean, there is more discussion now, especially after the financial crisis, that there's probably new types of measurements how successful a country or a city is. I'm not just talking about this whole GDP discussion, but also I'm talking about things that, quality of life has become more and more important because, again, the creative class wants quality of life. They don't probably care about, for example, the real size of a city, as long as, their lifestyle is met there and safety or whatever. So these new factors, I think, will slowly probably go, in favor of this. But I totally see your point that right now it's still an uphill battle because, again, I've been there and I've seen this, I've witnessed this, is, these promises who was made, cities basically based on Florida's book. Poor Richard Florida, I think his theory is very right, but he was then misused for very short-term thinking. I'm not criticizing Providence's claim to creative capital, but I think why do you need a big campaign doing Providence, Rhode Island creative capital? Probably you should have started from the other side, and this is probably the thing. But I see the point that it's still an uphill battle.
Hi, I'm interested in your thoughts on smaller urban hubs, particularly in America, like Austin or Philadelphia, Detroit, where its data is shown that artists are moving there, especially in the recession, to escape, high rents and quality of life. And so, what do you think about things that these cities are doing to welcome and sort of nurture these artists with artist residencies and, regional art fairs on the for-profit side? And do you think that is a waste? And then if so, where does that leave the artists?
Yeah, it's an very interesting question. I think there's good and bad news at the same time. The good news is definitely that, again, arts and creativity can make a difference. And in the case of Detroit, I think it is very promising that some, especially young people, and in the United States, we have offices in Zurich and Los Angeles, so I know the United States quite well. In the United States, you have now a generation of people who have, huge unemployment problems, and actually highly educated people. We're not just talking about, people with lower education. So if these people take initiative and go there and try to make a change, and there are many programs, I think this is good. Now, the bad news is two things. First of all, economically, and I'm both. I'm also a shrewd businessman and also looking at economists. Again, and this was a little bit the Berlin case I was making. Unfortunately, very low rents in the long term are probably not good for creative industry. I know it sounds very bad, but actually the high rents of the big cities, this totally, the artists and creative industry being forced to be successful, and I'm not such saying commercially successful, but also visible, interesting, is probably good if you have a little bit more of pressure. And so, unfortunately, probably at the beginning, low rents or so is okay, and weak structure because it makes things possible. But in the long term, I think, again, to undermine my point, you then need business and economic development to move in. There is no case, unfortunately, in the human history of a city who was just successful in hosting a bunch of artists, and this is it. Again, arts turns into business in general, again, in the big numbers, has never been seen. It's still the other way around. So the bad news is that at one point, cities like Detroit, Austin is a different case. Austin is a very successful, actually, in a business case, and I still would see Austin as a city who first was business and now is very strong in arts. And don't forget that Austin has a lot of, jobs who never will perish because it's a capital. So the idea of these low rents, low structures attracting, yes, but long term, it's probably even dangerous, unfortunately. Now, smaller community, real smaller, I still consider Detroit and Austin is quite okay. Really smaller communities, I mean, look at Marfa or other cases. I mean, these are special cases, but I think it is interesting that there are small towns who are using creative industry and arts to change. Although I had a conversation actually this week at the art fair with somebody who is very much an insider, and she told me still, for example, in Marfa, there's still two Marfas. There is an art world creative Marfa with very nice food and nice hotels and all stuff, and there is the high unemployment, high dropout rate, illegal immigrants, tough world Marfa, and they're still not connected in a town of, 5,000 people. So again, there needs to be different forces, and creative industry and arts is not just the cure itself.
What would the structure be of the relationship between business, art, and education in the Southern Hemisphere?
That's a difficult question. Well, I could imagine that, generally spoken, probably if the Southern Hemisphere and the emerging countries look at some of the models in the north and realize that probably some of the money was not spent very well, the learning process, the learning curve could be quicker. And so some of these culture would actually probably begin from early on, let's say a bottom-up, for example, education, art and education, a link than what we did. Or by the way, or we had it more and we somehow forgot about it. I mean, one of the problems and one of the dirty secrets is that, the crisis is something which we fabricated ourselves, and I see Western Europe and the United States in the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, we had already destruction and we start to forget about it, so now we have to recreate it. So hopefully the Southern Hemisphere, or the emerging countries, I would probably call it was a little bit simplified here, will have a quicker or a faster understanding of it. And it's actually interesting if you look at these cities, and I have quite an interesting insight into these Persian Gulf cities. We all criticize them. Yeah, fast growing. You just write all the articles about Qatar. Why can't they host a World Cup and all stuff? And now it comes this, all these art museums, superficial, just helicoptered in. Well, if you look closer, actually, they're starting to have very, very interesting educational programs in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, especially for women. One big thing, still very, by our standard, conservative societies, where actually art provides a very interesting or creative industry breakthrough for women to be actually entrepreneurs or successful entrepreneurs. So these models, for example, the constraints of certain conservative or let's say still kind of authoritarian thinking will probably in a very strange way help innovative programs where we are kind of laid back already and think, well, we're fine, we're all so creative, so cool. It's not going to happen, and we are actually facing an education crisis in this country and in Europe of a huge size, of a big, big, scary size. I think it's enough provocation, right? It's enough kind of bad news. Thanks very much.